Welcome everybody to the Agile Coach Office Hours. My name is Akash Srinivasan. I'm guessing you dialed in because you either saw the post on LinkedIn that my team had put out there, or you've been in one of my classes in the past, and you've heard me talk about the office hours there. But basically, this is a free service that I do once a month where it's an open forum. Anybody can dial in and ask questions related to all things Agile. Sometimes people dial in and ask questions about, Agile metrics. Sometimes they ask about Scrum Masters or product owners, role specific things. Sometimes they ask about Agile transformation. I don't have a very rigid format of how I do these things. If it's a smaller crowd, then we just kind of talk, and you're welcome to yell out your question, and we can talk about your question as long as you want to. Then we move on to something else. You're also welcome to put your questions in the chat window. If you put it in the chat window, I will request that you set the filter to everyone so that everybody can see your question. Because if you only send it to me and I answer the question, people might not have the context about the question. So it'd be nicer if you can either put it to everybody. That way I'll just sort of go one question at a time and I'll answer questions. Usually my team sends me a list of questions that people have already sent before the session. I didn't get any of those questions this time, so I'm guessing we don't have any of those. So there's nothing to precede the conversation with. But with all this said, I'm going to pause now. If anybody has any questions, this is the time to ask. Go nuts. So the things you had listed in terms of the sequence of events, they seem pretty standard in terms of the kind of work you would do for planning or getting ready for planning, and then execution, and then reviewing or retrospecting on it. I think you had like a nuance of pre-refinement and refinement, which almost sounds to me like the path to readiness. So you're breaking up your path to readiness into multiple stages. As long as in both those conversations, you're anchoring the conversations in refinement or pre-refinement around the definition of ready. So the definition of ready as that measurement of, a quality of requirements coming in, right? So it's like a boundary condition of quality check for anything that comes into the sprint. Anything that doesn't meet that boundary condition essentially doesn't get into the sprint. So quality comes in, right? As long as you're talking about anything that has to do with requirements readiness, by anchoring it to those definitions of ready, you should be okay. As far as the rest of your cadence, it almost sounded like you were asking, how will that change in terms of my sprint planning? And it shouldn't. I think it's almost sounds like you just have a tiered way of doing refinement, but the rest of it seems pretty straightforward. What I was concerned about, though, when I looked at the different phases you have dev start, dev complete, QA. So there seemed to be some phased driven approach there where you were focusing on one specific function of your delivery lifecycle in a specific area. As long as you're consciously breaking the batch size into smaller pieces, so you're not doing all of development and then all of testing, because that creates a bit of a relay race approach, right? So when one function is working, the other function doesn't have much to do. And so the goal is to minimize, it's probably going to be a relay race to some degree. The goal is to minimize the amount of relay race or maximize the amount of overlap you have between that. And that can be done through a bunch of things like cross-training, or people working on more generalized, specialized skills, which means if your programmers are coding, then your testers can develop test cases, they can create test requirements, they can develop test plans, generate test data. And so there's some of that preempting you can do before you start with the next function. But other than that, the sequence shouldn't change. It seemed like you had the same plan, do, check, act. I don't think it will change, but I think what might end up happening is you might have to scale some of those events, which means you might have tiered refinements. You might even have tiered planning sessions where selected representatives from other groups might get together at a higher level of abstraction from a planning perspective. And they might talk through, synchronization opportunities or just opportunities of shared work across teams. So you might have like planning for planning, refinement for refinement, and that might just scale across your hierarchy.